Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. One of the cool ways to find where your growth edge might be, or where you could upgrade your way of participating in the world. This isn't necessarily related to healing as much as being on an upward spiral of enjoying being you more and more as time goes by, having your life be more easeful and have more needs met with less effort. I think that there's a lot to be said for continuing to iterate in research and development. So they didn't just produce the iPhone and say, this is awesome, we will sell this forever. They kept making newer versions. And not to go too far down that analogy, because there's of course complexity with, questions of electronics, but this notion that in terms of developing new things, a lot of times you develop the cool new thing and then you figure out how to make it cooler and more elegant and more effective and save on power and more ecologically responsible. And there's this flow. And I think that's a really good model for our lives, to be asking the question, where would I like to put my attention to up-level my life, to have things work even better? If I have a good relationship, how could it be more awesome? One of the influencers I follow does therapy with her husband, even though they're not up against particular marital problems, because it's super helpful to proactively look at things. And according to her, their therapist says they're the only couple that cuddle on the couch while they're doing therapy, because they're not waiting until their adversarial issues. They're coming in with goodwill, genuinely wanting to hear and understand and upgrade the relationship. I continue to seek out and invest in what I call facilitated personal inquiry. And it's not therapy. I don't feel like I need healing. It's just about a proactive way to look at where the crunchy bits are, where they're like a 1 or a 2 instead of a 7 or an 8. So I have the opportunity to solve problems before they're creating disruption in my life, and to continue to deepen and improve the relationship to myself. And I love when clients use me as a resource for that, because I feel like I have a tremendous amount to offer. And it's a way of working with someone that I find super fun and enjoyable, and gets into some of the subtlety and the nuance and how precise my guides can be that I don't always get to when I'm doing the more foundational work of something like soul retrieval. So in terms of looking at this for yourself, one of the places that you can gather a lot of information about yourself is whether you have an over-tolerance or an under-tolerance for a particular flavor of discomfort. So, for example, I have a friend who's in the Marine Corps, and I absolutely adore her. And as with many people who've been in the armed services, particularly the Marine Corps, she is really tough. Things can get really uncomfortable physically, and she can suck it up, embrace the suck, and keep going. And she ended up in the hospital with a rather severe kidney infection because she didn't think it was actionable. She was just enduring the fever. Well, it comes down a couple of degrees. It's still a fever, but it's not as high as it was this morning. Maybe this will work itself out. And so she waited a lot longer than most people would have to seek medical care, because her tolerance for physical discomfort is so much higher than the average humans, that the point at which someone else would have said, no, nobody likes to go to the hospital, but I should really go see ER and get this checked out, was way further out. And so we had a funny but also somewhat serious conversation about, I love how resilient you are to physical discomfort. I love how you can keep, no pun intended, soldiering on. However, this was not the right skill set to use when it came to seeking medical care for a health kind of thing. And so it's a calibration thing where ideally going forward, she'll remember that she's a lot tougher than the average person in regards to physical discomfort and will seek out up-to-date medical care much sooner and will have a more reasonable threshold. At the other end of that spectrum is the person who's more of a hypochondriac. So that's the person who they have one little twinge and discomfort and become obsessed with the pain or the discomfort, and their mind starts to worry. Could it be this? Could it be that? And they go in and they get tests and everything's really okay. So that would be an under tolerance for discomfort. So there's an optimal way where something that's not a big deal, you're not obsessed with it, and something that is a big deal, you notice. And if you're miscalibrated in either direction, that's less than optimal. Another place to really look at this calibration is for important, difficult conversations in your core relationships. So the ability to cough up the truth, the ability to have difficult conversations, to say this isn't working for me and I love you and I want to be with you, and at the same time I really need some things to shift, or this is what's important to me, what do you need? Being skillful at those kind of, how do we find a win-win in a relationship? How do I appreciate and defend what you want and receive the same from you? One of the relationship educators that I really like was talking about him and his partner and buying a house around the fact that they both wanted the other person to have what was really important to them. So he was aware of how important sleep was to her, so he was going to defend her ability to get enough sleep. And they were a very polyamorous, very open couple, so he loved having morning sex with other lovers, but he wanted to make sure that he didn't take her sleep away, and she didn't want to take that away from him. So their house buying choice was influenced by the ability to set up the house in a way that they could defend and support and honor this really important need for both people. And there's a beauty and an elegance, but if you can't speak up and say, this is what really matters to me, this is what's really important, I'm going to be really adversely affected if I can't have this. We talk about needs, and sometimes people default back to, well, I won't die if I don't get heard or seen or acknowledged or touched. But I think it's useful to define those things as things that doing without would really cost you. So I have that relationship to sleep. It's not that I will die if I don't get a good night's sleep, but it really costs me if I don't get enough sleep. It costs me in terms of my mood, my mental focus, my ability to do shamanic work. My immune system doesn't particularly appreciate it. So I put a lot of commitment to curating a life that allows me to get really good sleep. And I'm not all that good of a sleeper. I sometimes wake up in the night and can be restless. And so there's a lot that goes into that because it diminishes my effectiveness if I don't have that need met. And I think for a lot of people, when they are up against an over-tolerance and under-tolerance that have kind of paired up, they can end up living with things that are really, really not good for them. So someone who is staying in an abusive relationship probably has an over-tolerance for the verbal abuse or the violence that they're living with, or the lack of certainty or the walking on eggshells. They have an overdeveloped ability to tolerate those things, much more so than would be healthy or aligned. And they probably have an underdeveloped tolerance for the tension and the fear that goes into change. In addiction, they talk about the concept of warm shit because it's the pattern by which you go through the process of getting clean or sober and then go back because it's familiar. You know what to expect with that. And it's very hard. It's very intense to be in the ego death of, I don't know who I would be. I don't know what this would look like. I don't know what would happen in the world. And we have these instincts that say, if you're not going to die, stay with what works to survive. So our instincts, unfortunately, don't care about self-actualization or quality of life or happiness. Their gig is to help us not die. And if they get overly loud in the conversation, they will advocate us living with things that are terrible for our quality of life, but we didn't die. It isn't going to kill us. It's not time to make a move. You don't abandon, the land you've lived on for all these years in times of drought unless it's really, really, really intolerable. And then you pack up and you move somewhere else. But it's not like a thing that the instincts would like you to undertake lightly. They only want you to make a move if the survival is more threatened by staying there than going into the unknown. So they're never going to give you wise, good counsel about the wisdom of leaving an abusive relationship. One of the things that I struggle with, I really like sugar a lot, and I kind of have this underdeveloped tolerance for the tension that's created when I'm resisting a craving, which means that I can collapse my intentions of how much sugar I mean to eat. It's gotten a lot better over the years, but especially when I was younger, that tolerance for the tension that builds when you're having a craving and you're not eating the thing. Now, not coincidentally, my instincts were running a lot higher when I was in struggle with that, and the instincts say, eat the most calorically dense food you possibly can that doesn't belong to someone else because you're under stress and you don't have secure access to food. We do in the modern era, but our instincts don't know that. So it's actually a pretty good strategy to eat extra calories if they're available when you're under stress, which worked fine if you were a hunter-gatherer person. It was good to carry extra weight in the summer in preparation for the winter. But for modern humans, those are misguided instincts. They're not on the side of our health and balance, and we have foods that hack our brain reward chemistry in this weird way that wasn't available when, we didn't have processed foods. And so as my instinct activation has come down, the amount of tension that's created by choosing not to listen to my instincts and eat the craving thing. I'm also not numbing emotionality like I was, so the urgency isn't there. So as a younger person, my tolerance for feeling my emotions was a lot lower. The point at which I would start numbing and trying to get out of the situation and figure something else out to not feel what I was feeling happened a lot sooner. I don't love sitting down with grief, but I can be like, oh, I think I need to sit down and cry for 5 minutes. And I can sit down and cry for 5 minutes. No fuss, no muss, move some energy, super helpful, not that big a deal. Don't have a lot of emotional debt on grief. So if I am grieving something, it's not going to be compounded by a bunch of other unprocessed emotion that would have me sobbing for 45 minutes. If I did, that would be okay. That would be what needed to move through. But that tolerance for emotionality. So I see people, who are incredibly brave and heroic in the face of life-threatening danger in the service, the armed forces, but who are terrified of feeling their emotions. You ask them to sit down and have a conversation about what they're feeling, and they have no words and no idea, and desperately want to find something else to do. A lot of addiction is tied to that under tolerance of emotionality. And so it's worth looking at, like, where in my life am I tolerating a discomfort that ideally would be actionable? Ideally, this level of anger or hurt or sadness or fear or discomfort or exhaustion would be actionable. But I'm not making it actionable because I'm so used to tolerating it. People who work unsustainable jobs and exhaust their body can get used to it, so they can have way too high a tolerance, which can create health problems down the road. So where is your tolerance for something that should be actionable, should be feedback? Pain is feedback. Emotions are feedback. It tells you, hey, this isn't working as well as it could. Maybe I should make a move. Where are you able to endure this to such a degree that you're not making it actionable? And where are the areas that you have so little tolerance built up that you move in a not very elegant way in order to avoid discomfort? So, that could be the social anxiety that gets in the way of, calling in for a job interview or showing up for a job interview. And it's not to make yourself wrong and bad about these things, but they're areas to look at and say, okay, I have terrible social anxiety. I absolutely had terrible social anxiety. I blushed incredibly red. I have very fair skin, so everybody could tell that I was blushing horribly. And just a simple interaction like going into a convenience store at 12 years old to buy a bag of chips, which my parents were like, yes, you can have a bag of chips, but you have to buy it, was almost debilitating in its level of anxiety, heart pounding, palms sweating, so much tension. And I'm not making my parents wrong for this. It's like, yeah, you need to have the skill to complete a basic transaction on your own. This is appropriate. But I just went on a cruise to Alaska, which I got the most incredibly good deal and went solo and had an amazing time. And I knew not a soul on the ship. I knew not another human being. And I had all kinds of interactions because in order to protect from COVID, they won't even let you pick up a utensil and serve yourself from the buffet. You have to ask for, the amount of spinach that you want on your plate and which ingredients in your salad. And so all of these interactions with other humans, and my heart rate didn't speed up. I was relaxed. I was calm. I had my voice. I wasn't hesitating to ask for something. There was an ease, and that was inconceivable to me in my 20s, but it was an area that I did a lot of work on. And at this point, I think I was, as a teenager and in my 20s, I think I was way below average with social interaction skills, and I would say I'm solidly above average in my 40s. There's been this shift and change. So it's helpful to say that if you don't have a skill or ability, it's figure outable. You can learn, you can have the growth mindset. The fixed mindset says, if I'm shy, I'm stuck with shy. It's an innate characteristic. For me, I needed to learn energetic protection so that I could filter other people's energy and not be so overwhelmed with the loudness before I could parse the actual words they were saying to me. And sometimes I'm not even that much on my game. I'm a little spacey and I have no problem saying, I am so sorry, I am not tracking well. I had a long flight over to Hawaii for another vacation, and I got to the rental car counter and everybody else was figuring it out way faster, and I had to ask like 3 or 4 times. I'm like, I am so sorry, I did not catch what you just said, because I'd had a lot of stimulation of, getting to the airport and a long flight and all the experiences, and my brain wasn't working as well, but I wasn't fussed about it. I was like, yeah, they'll help me figure it out. They may think I'm an idiot. I know I'm not an idiot, but right now I look like an idiot, so that's okay. So allowing that, you can give yourself grace, but you can also be in that growth mindset of saying the things that are stopping me are learnable skills. I had a friend who went to therapy kicking and screaming in absolute misery, so uncomfortable. It's like the worst thing ever, but she had a relationship that was really going downhill and they desperately needed some triage. The relationship ended up ending. She wasn't being dragged kicking and screaming, but she stayed in therapy because she'd seen its value and she really liked the therapist. So she went from, I will do anything not to sit on a couch for an hour and talk about my feelings, to, yeah, actually this really resources me. I mean, there are times that I hate it and I get really triggered and it's super uncomfortable, but I love what it's doing for me. I'm committing my time and my money to this thing. For some people, the tension is being able to over tolerate the stress that arises with procrastination, with all the stress and anxiety that happen when there's important adulting that needs to happen and you're not doing it. And that down the road it's going to be a problem, but today you could push it back and promise yourself that you'll get to it tomorrow. And I remember the times when I've been really, stuck in procrastination and in argument with myself about doing the thing or not doing the thing. And I talk about that more in the podcast on self-efficacy. For some people, the tension of their life going in a not very good direction is tolerable. Some people have health issues that they're not treating. So somebody who's not compliant with the diet that will help with diabetes is, driving the train of their health off the cliff. And I know there's so much complexity that goes into food addiction. And so lots of compassion for someone who's in the place of having a very serious physical condition that will be badly exacerbated by a lifestyle choice, who's not able to make the change, who's more able to tolerate the decline of their health and the fear of that and the helplessness than they are to tolerate whatever the discomfort is about making the change and sitting with that. So we can probably most easily see examples in other people where they're over tolerating one kind of discomfort because of an under tolerance for a different kind of discomfort. And at the same time, it's really useful to look internally and say, wow, this is going to give me a lot of information about myself for what I tolerate better or worse. And when you get past the really big places that this shows up, it can show up in more subtle ways. So one of the places that I manage tension is lack of closure. So I like closure. Closure makes me happy. I like having a plan, but there are times when a relationship just needs some time to see what happens. Is this person going to follow up? Are they going to do what they said they were going to do? And there were times when I ended things prematurely because I couldn't sit with the lack of closure. There are also people who keep things going and open because they don't like the closure or the clarifying conversation. So it can go either way. But for me, saying, all right, I'm managing tension because I don't like lack of closure, but there are times when lack of closure is the most appropriate, elegant, aligned place for something to be. My father has just finished a back surgery, and I'm super happy to be on the other side of the surgery having gone well and him being in recovery. And leading up to it, I had a tension because I knew that surgery can be dangerous, and I was aware of it, and really good medical care and everything else, but there was a lack of closure for the outcome of the surgery that just wasn't available. And so how did I manage my discomfort with that tension so that I could have a good time in the meantime, so that I could enjoy my life without having to postpone feeling good and centered and calm until I could obtain the closure of whatever it was that was still open, that was still in play, that didn't have the whole thing settled in a way that was satisfying to me. Because there are times when there's just no action to take. It's just more about managing your own reaction to the experience. And so there are places where I deliberately cultivate my ability to deal with a certain kind of discomfort, like a lack of being in control, because I can get way too control-y pants. There's a certain point where being kind of type A and really organized and thinking things through is super helpful. And there are times when I'm overthinking and it's not necessary. And I've really been working to honor what good things in my life that part does while providing it with enough adult supervision. I tend to think of myself as overly type A, but I was hiking in Alaska on this solo hike, and it was raining and it was windy and it was filled with beautiful fall colors, and it was this exquisite experience. And because I overthink things, I had thought through the packing very, very thoroughly about what I brought, and I'd done a ton of research years earlier to get the right gear to go on a different trip. And so I had all the right gear. I was carrying all the right things. I was able to be completely prepared, coming from San Diego, where we don't get a lot of rain, to be in the cold and the wind and the rain and not be physically uncomfortable, because that's a kind of discomfort I don't tolerate all that well, so that I could be in the savoring of the beauty and the magic and feeling the energy of the space and being alone in these magical woods. It was exquisite. And Type A Katie got me there with the planning and the packing and repacking and figuring out exactly what I wanted to bring. It took me 10 times longer than it would if someone who threw a couple fresh pairs of underwear and a toothbrush in a duffel bag and called it good. It was way more complicated, but I am complicated, and so it worked out with a lot of elegance. But at the same time, I want to tolerate the discomfort of saying, hey, honey, you're resourceful. Future Katie's got that. She'll figure it out. Future Katie is intelligent. She'll have all the facts. She'll solve the problem. Let's stop solving hypothetical problems and get back into the here and now. So There's a lot that you can do to learn things about yourself and kind of see where your Achilles heel is, see where you're likely to respond to situations in ways that aren't very elegant and up to date or most effective based on discomfort that you either over or under tolerate. And it's just a way to kind of check your work and see when you're doing something that maybe doesn't serve you as deeply as something else could, and just have that be an ongoing relationship. Am I having this part of me that wants to control everything or wants closure getting too loud? My instincts are probably unsettled. I probably need to work on feeling a little more centered. Those voices will be there in the background, but they won't be as shouty. They won't be as intense. They won't be creating tension if I recenter. So I should probably bring my levels down, and then this aspect will be more manageable. So a next really good question, besides where do I over tolerate or under tolerate discomfort, is what would give me the capacity to be more aligned, be more middle ground with this form of discomfort. What do I need? Okay, I feel really stressed about difficult conversations. I think I'll do some meditation and some breathing exercises before I step in. I have a lot of social anxiety. I don't tolerate interacting with people I don't know. I think I'll read a book and learn some more strategies and start to implement them, or I'll find ways to deal with a small group of strangers instead of, an immersion experience with strangers. So finding out how that discomfort that is important to tolerate would be easier to endure is another really great thing to ask yourself if you go down this avenue of self-inquiry that I'm inviting you to explore. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.